logging on from across the country, so we'll make a start. Thank you for joining us for what I'm sure will be a very interesting hour ahead. I'm Matt Luce. I'm a principal of Stratus and a director of our corporate sustainability practice. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar we're calling The Recipe for Sustainable Food. I'm delighted to be joined today by two colleagues from Unilever who together lead the company's work on the Sustainable Living Plan in Canada and shape the company's food marketing. I'd like to introduce, first of all, Ali Leung. Alison's been working for Unilever for 15 years, and she currently runs the marketing for the foods portfolio, which includes brands such as Hellmann's, Knorr, Becel, and Ragù. And I'd also like to introduce Catherine McVitie. And Catherine works with the Unilever North American Communications and Sustainability team, focused on the Canadian external stakeholder outreach and employee engagement on the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And I've personally learned a huge amount from them both in our discussions together about how Unilever is making sustainable food live within their business, and I'm thrilled that they'll be able to share some of that insight today. You'll be hearing from them both after I've made some framing remarks about sustainable food. We'd like to make today's webinar as interactive as possible, so we're going to be asking for your input as a number of points through the webinar with some quick polls. To get us going, you should soon see a blue screen appear in front of you, and you can click on the answer most relevant to you. So where are you located? Are you located in Eastern Canada, Western Canada, Northern Canada, the US, or indeed Europe? We'll give you a couple of seconds to respond, and then final clicks, and we'll close the poll. So, so the results. So we have a big concentration of people in Eastern Canada, with a few people also joining from the West and from the US. So welcome to you wherever you are. So our agenda today, I've almost finished with the welcomes. I'll conclude that with the agenda here. I'll start with an introduction to Stratus, who we are and what we do, and I'll then run through some background into our research here on sustainable food. I'll start with some definitions. I'll describe the business case for sustainable food, talk about how leading companies approach managing for sustainable food, and then I'll close with what we call the Stratus recipe for sustainable food. And then we'll turn to Catherine and Ali, and Catherine will introduce the work that Unilever is doing around its Sustainable Living Plan. And then Ali will then describe how Unilever is making this real through the marketing and delivery of those brands to consumers. I'm happy to say that we'll have some time for questions at the end, and we'll invite you to submit questions to us through the comments section. We'll endeavor to get to as many as possible, but we'll apologize now if we don't get to all of them, as we do have quite a number of people on the line with us. We'll certainly aim to follow up and respond to any questions that we weren't able to answer. And I would say that please do submit questions as they come to you, as we'll be taking them throughout the webinar, but we'll be turning back to them at the close. So, who is Stratus? Well, we're a specialized management consulting firm that helps clients to design and execute sustainability strategies. In the food sector, that means that we help clients answer two questions. What does sustainable food mean for our organization, and how do I improve performance? And our work in the food sector is informed by research that we published in April this year. And that research we call The Recipe for Sustainable Food draws on the sustainable food practices of 5 leading companies. So we're very grateful for the insights provided by Marks & Spencer, Tim Hortons, Sodexo, Unilever, McCain, companies who span the food sector in different parts of the sector, and who've done some really excellent work in advancing their sustainable food practices. I'm going to share the highlights of that today, but you'll certainly find much more detail in the full report, and you can see the URL for the full report on your screen now. So another quick poll. One of the basic premises of our work is the conviction that in order to improve the sustainability of our food system, consumers need to be able to make informed choices. And I'd be interested to see how the audience feels today about your ability to identify which foods are more sustainable at the grocery store. And again, I'll give you a few moments to vote. And then we have a few final votes coming in, and we'll close the poll and share the results. So my personal take is that it's very, very complex to decide when you're in a grocery store and you have those split seconds to make a decision about which product to buy. And I'm happy to see that there are some people who feel that they can make that decision accurately in that time. I think I would personally be in the no camp and think that there's some significant work to do before consumers are able to make that determination. So turning back to our slides, the first step in our research was to try and take stock of the sustainable food status. And the key message here is that the scale of the impacts of our food system are profound. The decisions that we make daily, both as consumers or indeed as part of the food value chain, have a profound impact on sustainability outcomes. So taking a deliberately Canadian perspective on this, the first thing that I'd like to say is that despite Canada being one of the largest food producing economies on the planet, and we've got currently something like 5%, just over 5% of global exports come from Canada, and likely more in this year of bumper crops in Canada. There are significant portions of our society that don't have enough food, and in fact, if you look at Health Canada data, across the country, nearly 7% of people are food insecure. So that means that they either don't have enough food or they don't have the quality of food that they need. And there are, of course, quite strong variations across the country. In Ontario, for example, nearly 1 in 10 people are food insecure. But if you go north to Nunavut, that number skyrockets to nearly 1 in 3. So despite the abundance of food in Canada, a number of people, many people don't have enough food to eat. But we also face huge food-related health challenges, one of which, of course, is obesity. And just to take a couple of examples of how this issue plays out, something like 1 in 5 children are overweight, 60% of adults are overweight. And shockingly, from an environmental perspective, we throw out something like 40% of all food that is produced, and most of that is in your and my homes. Recent studies in the UK suggest that most of the fresh bread and most of the lettuce that is produced is thrown away. So more than 50% of lettuce grown is thrown away at some part in the value chain. Looking at this from a producer perspective, something like 10% of Canada's CO2 and 20% of Canada's water footprint can be attributed to the production and use of food. We have a small number of farms, something like 2% of farms that are certified to organic standards. We have a sector that is undergoing massive change, and just one indicator of that, in the 5 years from 2001 to 2006, something like 10% of farms closed. So a hugely important sector, both in Canada and globally, with significant impacts. The key message really is that we need sustainable food. Which, of course, begs the question, what is a sustainable food? And the first substantive finding from our research is that this concept is very, very hard to pin down. And this definition here was developed based on work that was completed by the UK-US think tank Sustainability. I'll read it out. You can see also on this slide the number of the sustainability issues that are at play in food sustainability called out in the bubbles. So sustainable food is produced within ecological limits by empowered food producers, nutritious and accessible to all. It's delivered through a reliable, resilient and transparent value chain that makes best use of local and regional produce. And the issues at play span climate change, human rights, health, and local economic impact. And a quick note that in the full report you'll find a breakdown of how companies are approaching managing each of these on an issue-by-issue basis. So one more quick poll. Obviously the scope of sustainable food is very broad. I'd be very interested to hear your opinion on what the most pressing sustainable food issues that we face. So many of these issues are clearly interrelated, but if you could address only one of those issues, which one would it be? I'll give you a few moments to make some final clicks in, and we'll close the poll. Okay, so very interesting results there. Food waste. I think if you look at the work that's underway in the Canadian marketplace, I think this food waste will be a very important issue in the coming years, and it's an area that's already seeing a lot of innovation in places like the UK. It's very interesting to see climate change also top of that list. Okay, so sustainable food means that we are tackling a range of issues. It also means that we need to take a very hard look at the value chain, the food value chain. And the message I'd like to stress here is that sustainable food means very different things when you think about different value chains. So as a consumer sitting in Ottawa, Ontario, the sustainability issues associated with the tomato that I buy, a local tomato bought in August, that's grown just down the road from here, would be very different from the sustainability issues associated with a tomato grown in Mexico, bought from the same store just 4 months later. So the sustainability of the food is really about how we optimize, how we make the value chain as efficient as possible. So that's what a sustainable food is. How do you go about making the case for investing in sustainable food, or indeed why are the companies that we studied in our research investing in this area? Well, we found 3 main drivers. The first, the icon on the left, was about improving the resilience of the food supply chain. As our colleagues from Unilever will probably tell you in a moment, Unilever purchases over 10% of the world's black tea. So if you're purchasing on that scale, you clearly have a stake on the sustainability of that sector. The second, cost, continuous improvement and efficiency, very, very common arguments in any business case. McCain's, for example, have made significant investments in areas including manufacturing efficiency, agronomy, that have both delivered tangible business benefits but also sustainability benefits. And the third, and I think perhaps a more profound area, is in meeting customer needs. And it should be clear to everybody that successful businesses do well because they respond to their customers. Sodexo, for example, has tracked and responded to significant customer interest in Canada in sustainable food. And in particular, they're seeing strong interest in local and healthy foods from institutional food buyers. So that's been a strong focus of their sustainable food programs. So another quick poll. The holy grail of sustainability really is whether people will pay more for sustainably produced products. Our research suggested the jury's out. I'll be curious to see what this, albeit specialist group on the webinar today think. I'll give you a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds to click through there. Our research certainly suggested that the jury's out. Something like 30% of food products today are released with a sustainability message of some type. I'll close the poll here. And very interesting that the group today are very clear on their willingness to pay more for sustainably produced food. I think as consumers we're perhaps more mixed up than that. As just one example, something like a recent study showed about 80% of U.S. consumers see eating local food as important, but if asked to put their money where their preferences are, something like 50% only make a habit of buying local on a day-to-day basis. So how do leading companies manage for sustainable food? We're going to hear from Catherine and Ali about how Unilever approach sustainable food, but what did our research tell us more broadly about how companies do it? Well, the first message I want to give you is that you can't manage all sustainable food issues at once. You have to know your priorities. And there are a range of ways in which companies are making decisions about the areas they focus on. I've already mentioned Sodexo, who because of their customers are focusing on local and nutritious food and healthy food in Canada. You might equally make decisions based on the volume of your purchasing. So to take another Unilever example, the largest agricultural commodity that Unilever sources is palm oil, so a huge focus of their sustainable agriculture efforts. You might equally make a decision based on reputational risk. So Marks and Spencer's, for example, have done a lot of work around seafood because that's been identified as a particular risk for their brand. So you know your priorities. You might also, once you have your priorities, you need to know what you're trying to achieve. And setting targets or objectives can not only mobilize your business, but can also mobilize the value chain. So, for example, Tim Hortons has signaled that it's going to work with the pork industry to move to more humane and open housing systems for pigs. And they're also working on traceability and verification. So that's not just something that they are targeting to improve the sourcing of their own pork products, but in doing so and doing so publicly, they're also hoping to influence the industry more broadly to do so. And of course, as the industry moves behind something, it delivers it more efficiently and perhaps at lower cost for companies like Tim Hortons. So you know what you're focusing on, what you're trying to achieve. You then need to select the right blend of tools and tactics to implement, and that might include a range of things from, I'd say, let's start with ingredient and choice editing. So the most efficient way to eliminate a sustainability impact associated with a food is to eliminate or edit the ingredient that's coming from. So for example, Marks and Spencer's have eliminated trans fats from their shelves. Value chain standards. We're going to hear about Unilever's efforts to establish a sustainable agriculture code momentarily. It's an area that's very important, but also quite challenging. And again, you can find in the report some thoughts about how to set value chain standards effectively. Building supply chain capacity. Tim Hortons, for example, has established what they call the Tim Hortons Coffee Partnership, which is an effort to work with small-scale coffee producers to help build their businesses and improve livelihoods at a small-scale producer level in parts of their developing coffee supply chain. Auditing. You have standards that you're applying. You need to check that they're being met. Tim Hortons have established a supplier code of conduct and are currently developing and releasing plans to make sure that they're implementing to those, or their suppliers are implementing to that standard. Measuring. The old truism is that you can't manage what you don't measure. McCain's, for example, in reviewing the environmental impacts of their food processing or food operations, identified the impacts of potato processing to be particularly important from greenhouse gas and water efficiency perspective, so focus their efforts there. And a final note on efficiency. This is a very cost-sensitive industry, so you need to approach these efforts in a way that manage costs through the value chain. And another nod to Unilever and indeed Marks and Spencer's, both of whom have supported the Cool Farm tool to enable greenhouse gas monitoring at a farm level. One final poll from my side. I've flown over this here, but a particularly important question, and certainly in light of the cost that third-party certification can add into the system, is whether independent verification of sustainability of food products is important. This might be fair trade, it might be organic, it might be Marine Stewardship Council certified fish. So I'm going to close the poll. Any final clicks? I think the clear message from you on the line here is that third-party certification is important, and I'd certainly suggest that that can be effective in building consumer confidence in a food product. So as I start to wrap up here from a Stratis perspective, before handing on to Catherine and Ali, I want to share what we call our Stratis recipe for sustainable food, which is essentially our how to put a sustainable food in front of a consumer. And the ingredients, so the starting point, inputs, smart and sustainable inputs that deliver on quality, price, taste, but also contribute to healthy diets, limit environmental impacts, and bring social benefits. A collaborative value chain. I hope I've made clear today that you can't do this by yourself, but you need your value chain partners to be along for the journey. Knowledgeable consumers. I think an important prerequisite here is that consumers need to be able to recognize, understand, and ultimately reward strong sustainable food performance by buying more sustainable products. And effective management. I think this is really about being able to manage efficiently based on sound business information. So those are the inputs, and the direction. Well, how do you do this from start to finish? Well, again, it starts with your ingredients. So you need to understand and measure the inputs that are going into your foods. Look for opportunities to improve performance. And just one example of that, if you're looking to a food product to deliver a protein, for example, there are higher footprint types of proteins than and lower footprint types of proteins. So, for example, pulse products deliver protein with a relatively low carbon impact compared to, say, meat products. Understanding sustainability from farm to fork. So here you need to know where your ingredients come from, how they're processed, and how consumers use them. You can understand the sustainability issues that sit behind them and prioritize those sustainability issues that matter to your products and your business. Take a consumer-centric approach, so educate and inform consumers, provide them with the information that they need to make sound decisions. That might be helped by clear labeling, might be backed by the appropriate third-party standards, which certainly everybody on the phone seems to think that as particularly important. And once you have that in place, you need to improve. So you need to find out where the gaps and weaknesses are in your performance and prioritize your improvement efforts to get most value. So that's a continuous improvement and optimization of the value chain. And finally, and last but not least, you need to communicate to ensure that your stakeholders, from your investors to your customers, understand the progress that you're making. So with that, I'm going to pause. That was a lightning run through the results of our sustainable food research. I'll like to remind you to start submitting questions for the later stage of the webinar, as we'll have an opportunity for discussion post the presentations. But at this point, it gives me great pleasure to pass over to Catherine and then Ali to share their insights from the Unilever perspective. So without further ado, I'll pass to Catherine McVitie, Sustainable Living Manager for, oh, it looks like Catherine has, we've lost Catherine. Catherine, can you hear us? Ali, can you hear us? Catherine,
can you hear us now?
I can, yes. Hello. Catherine, are you on the line? It looks
She's
like
on the line. I know she just told me she was back on.
Okay, super. We'll give Catherine a couple of moments to rejoin us. It looks like we have a technical problem there, but part of what Catherine will be sharing is Unilever's remarkable story regarding the Sustainable Living Plan. And as many of you, I'm sure, you have been following closely, Unilever have made some very bold commitments to decouple the growth of their company from the sustainability impacts associated with the food, the products that they deliver to consumers.
Can you hear me now?
Hi, Catherine.
Sorry about that.
Great ad-libbing, Matt.
Catherine, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thank you. I am having technical difficulties on my end, so I don't have the screen in front of me, but that's okay. So thank you very much, Matt, and I apologize for that brief delay. So I'm pleased to be here today to talk about Unilever's Sustainable Food Strategy. And as Matt was just saying, I'll talk a little bit about where this sustainable sourcing strategy fits into our overall Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, some specifics about how we at Unilever define sustainable food, sustainable sourcing primarily, and then talk a little bit about our progress to date. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is just a quick snapshot of Unilever. We're a company with over 400 brands with operations in nearly 100 countries and sales in almost every country in the world. Our products are bought over 150 million times a day and used 2 billion times a day in over half the households on the planet. So a company with significant reach and significant breadth in all corners of the globe. And the next slide, Unilever, the corporate name is not as well known as our brands, and this is just a quick snapshot of some of our larger brands, hopefully brands that you recognize and might have at home. And given the size and the reach not only of the business but of these brands themselves, even small changes or adjustments in our supply chain or our sourcing practices can have quite far-reaching impacts across those supply chains. So moving along, we'll just step back for a second and look at how sustainable sourcing fits within the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. As many of you, I think of you probably already know, in 2010, Unilever launched the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And the plan has 3 primary goals that are to be achieved over 10 years. So that would be until by 2020. And we aim to improve the health and well-being of 1 billion people across the globe. We aim to have the environmental footprint of our products across their entire life cycle. So that would be from the sourcing of raw materials right through to the use and the disposal of these products by our consumers. And the third one that we're here to talk about today is to source 100% of our agricultural raw materials sustainably. So just focusing on that last pillar, and talk a little bit about the rationale for putting sustainable sourcing as a key pillar of Unilever's sustainable growth strategy. So the next slide, these percentages show Unilever's share of world volume of these particular agricultural products. Over half of Unilever's raw materials do come from farms and forests, and that amounts to 7.5 million tons of agricultural raw materials a year. That includes approximately 350 varieties, as we like to say, from green tea to purple carrots. So needless to say, how we source these products and from whom we purchase can have significant impact on global resources, and that includes on water, forestry, biodiversity, climate change, and on farmer livelihoods. As Matt mentioned, for some of these crops, we are the largest purchaser, and that would include tea and vegetable oils. So on those crops where we are one of the largest, we can play quite a significant role in enabling a move towards sustainable farming practices across those supply chains. So we're large enough to have significant influence in practices. But of course, despite the fact that we do purchase, let's say, 350 varieties of agricultural products, in launching the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan in 2010, we had to prioritize our actions and chose to focus first on our top 10 agricultural raw material groups. They account for 2/3 of our volume and include products like palm oil, paper and board, soy, sugar, tea, fruit and vegetables, sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, and dairy ingredients. And we're making fairly good progress on those. And we do recognize, however, that challenges lie ahead, particularly for the raw materials for which we're relatively small purchasers. But we will pursue, regardless of our size and influence with various products, we will pursue not only because we think it's the right thing to do, because we believe that it's right for the long-term growth of our business. We believe that the sustainable sourcing strategy helps us manage a core business risk by ensuring security of supply over the long term, by helping us reduce costs and protecting scarce natural resources, as I mentioned just a second ago. We also believe that sustainably sourced ingredients taste better and that consumers will appreciate this difference and choose Unilever products over competitor products. So all in all, while we believe it's the right thing to do for many reasons, for the environment and for the livelihood of farmers, we also believe that it's an important strategy in terms of Unilever's long-term business growth. So maybe I'll just insert a quick poll question here. Curious to know, now that you know a little bit about the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan and Unilever's Sustainable Agriculture strategy, what you think that is the most important role Unilever should be playing in accelerating the food industry towards sustainable food. It could be working with consumers and building their understanding, working with our supply chain, as I think I've explained we are doing, or improving the sustainability of our own operations.
And Catherine, if you can't see the screen, this will be challenging, but we're getting some answers in, and we'll close the poll. And the resounding answer appears to be working with the supply chain to improve sustainability. Okay. So 77% of people there, with 16% on helping consumers understand sustainable food choices. Okay, good. So then it sounds as though from the opinions of the folks on the line that we're focusing our attention in the right area. So thank you for that. So moving along, I think it's important to understand how Unilever defines sustainable agriculture, because I don't think that there's necessarily a well-understood common definition. Unilever has been working on a sustainable sourcing strategy for over 15 years. And when we started out, as I say, it was no agreed upon definition of what sustainable farming meant for our key crops or for others. So over the years, we have been working to establish our sustainable agriculture program, and we have developed detailed guidelines on what sustainable agriculture means for our crops. This definition is contained in something that we call the Unilever Sustainable Agriculture Code, and the guidelines are based on 11 social, economic, and environmental indicators as listed on the slide. And these are all laid out very clearly with requirements in our Unilever Sustainable Agriculture Code. So our sustainable sourcing program does rely on farmers' compliance with the code, either through self-assessment and verification or through external certification standards that Unilever recognizes as being equivalent to the code. And those would include certification standards such as the Rainforest Alliance, or on crop-specific standards such as the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil or the Roundtable on Responsible Soy, both organizations which Unilever has been heavily involved in. So the code sets out the mandatory and good practice standards for each of these 11 factors and a process for continuous improvement. So this code does apply, we're working towards applying it to all our suppliers of agricultural raw materials, from the farmers producing them, the contractors working on the farm.
And so suppliers must comply with the code, and that also details external certification standards and self-verification methods. So as we've been rolling this out over the last couple of years, 2012 was a year of getting some scale with the code and also listening to farmers and gaining a better understanding of suppliers' challenges. But we do now have sustainably sourced tomatoes and dairy, sunflower seed, sugar beet, and potatoes. So we believe that given the diversity of these crops, that the code has the necessary flexibility across crops and across growing regions from which we source. So moving along, how are we doing? So since launching the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan in 2010, over 2 years, across our top 10 agricultural products that we've prioritized, we've made good progress. By the end of 2012, 36% of our agricultural raw materials were sustainably sourced, and that exceeds an interim milestone that we had set of 30% in 2012. So, and also this is up from 24% in 2011. But as mentioned earlier, we do know that the real challenge lies ahead in addressing those crops which we purchase smaller quantities and again have less influence. So finally, a little bit about that was global progress. So how are we doing here in North America? Across North America, 100% of our onions and tomatoes for the Knorr brand are sourced sustainably, primarily from California. As of March 2013, all of the Unilever tea sold in Canada is sourced from Rainforest Alliance certified farms. And across North America, 33% of all our fruit by volume is from sustainable sources, again, primarily from California and the Pacific Northwest. We've been working hard on the ice cream business and Ben & Jerry's in particular, and all Ben & Jerry's ice cream sold in Canada will be fair trade certified within the next year or so. The first fully fair trade flavor will be launched in Canada early in 2014. I'll just close with one anecdotal story about sustainably sourced oil here in North America. In Canada, we use primarily canola in our margarine and Hellmann's brands. However, in the United States, the oil for these brands primarily comes from soy. And it's significant volume of soy oil that we do buy in the United States, so it's an area of fairly high priority for Unilever. There is currently no soy produced in or farmed in the United States that meets the Roundtable on Responsible Soy certification standard. So we began addressing this back in 2011 and 2012, working with the United Soybean Board and World Wildlife Fund US to develop a Roundtable on Responsible Soy national interpretation for the US soy. Unfortunately, these efforts were not successful. So Unilever has taken another approach more recently and is working with 50 soy farmers in Iowa, specifically on a pilot project to deploy an online education tool so that farmers can evaluate their farming practices and sustainability performance in specific areas of including soil conservation, soil use, water use, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. So we are optimistic that this pilot project with Iowa farmers will be successful in moving them towards more sustainable farming practices, and if so, then we can roll that out to more farmers. And I bring that up only as an example of demonstrating, I guess, that Unilever doesn't have this all entirely figured out, and it's there's trial and error involved, and our willingness to work with others and work with farmers and farm organization groups in order to figure out the best way to move towards sustainable farming practices that work in local conditions. So I think that's it for me in terms of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan and how our sustainable agriculture strategy fits within that. And now I will turn it over to Alison, who can talk to you about how we take that strategy to consumers through our brand marketing. So over to you, Alison.
Thanks, Catherine. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes, we
Take that
can.
as a yes. So as Catherine mentioned, I'm Ali Lung. I'm the marketing director on our foods brands at Unilever. And I'm going to talk to you about how sustainability reaches our consumers. So first off, I won't claim to be a sustainability expert, particularly in supply chain, which clearly came through as being very important. But I will say that I'm a marketer who feels a real responsibility to grow my business sustainably. And on the screen right now, this is the marketing manifesto that we use around the globe, and it focuses on putting people first, striving to build brand love, and unlocking the magic in our brands. And you'll see in the green circles, and I've blown the words up, that sustainability is at the heart of what we do as marketers because we want to make sustainable living commonplace. We want our brands to meet people's needs for better health and well-being within the natural limits of the planet rather than driving consumption at any cost. And we want to do this for the generations to come. So now that I've briefly mentioned our marketing view of sustainability, I wanted to share what our research has told us on how consumers view sustainability. So if you move to the next slide, very similar to what Matt shared from the Stratos Learning, we know when you ask consumers about the word sustainability, it's complex, it's confusing, and it's abstract, and it means a lot of different things to different people. If you look at the next chart, now this actually is very different. Matt, if you could just move, thank you. Now this is actually very different than what we heard on the poll today. So when we asked today if the people in the audience would be willing to pay more, I think it was over almost 80% of people who said yes. But in fact, the average consumer, when we ask them what's holding you back from leading a more environmentally conscious lifestyle, 73% would actually say it costs too much. So dare I say the audience on the webinar today is particularly passionate about sustainability. Because in general, consumers are unwilling to compromise to live sustainably if it affects their lives. So you'll see a familiar chart now. This is what Catherine took you through. And Matt, if you could just advance to the next slide. So as Catherine mentioned, our three main objectives are to improve health and well-being, having the environmental footprint of our products, and finally sourcing 100% of our raw materials sustainably. And given we know that the word sustainability can be confusing to consumers, we've broken it down. So on the bottom, you'll see in those green circles what the true objectives are. And I'm going to share some examples, some marketing examples of how our Unilever Foods brands are tackling those four objectives on the bottom. Before I do that, though, I wanted to ask for your opinion. Do you think sustainably sourced foods actually taste better?
I'll give people a couple more moments and then close the poll.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Matt. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go through the four green circles. So the first thing that Unilever brands do to help improve health, so many of you will have heard about Baicel margarine. It's our largest food brand at Unilever, and the mission is to make Canadians' hearts healthier. And the way we do this is not just in our product recipe, which is low in saturated fat, etc., but one of the other ways we do to try and improve health is through a close partnership with the Heart and Stroke Foundation, which we've had for many years. Probably a lot of you know that the Heart and Stroke Foundation raises funds towards research and also to invest in awareness and prevention of heart disease and stroke. So some great examples of how we build this advocacy for heart health is to leverage the strong relationship we have. And Baicel has been the title sponsor for the Ride for Heart, and you can see in the photos below. The ride has been happening for 25 years, and Baicel has been the title sponsor for 20 of those years. So what does that mean? Well, in this past year alone, Baicel contributed over $330,000 to the ride, and this ride generated over $5 million in funds in Toronto alone. And then we also have the health check symbol, which many of you probably have seen on your foods. And we put this on our pack and in our recipes because we have met the rigorous health criteria in our products. So the next area that we also tackle is improving nutrition. So on Hellmann's, starting in 2009 with our Real Food movement, we have really been trying to keep more Canadians than ever with real food. And in some of those pictures, you can see some of our initiatives. So we've had community gardens in urban centers that Hellmann's sponsored. We've awarded grant funding to organizations, like on the bottom left, you'll see that comment about the deep fryer. That's because we donated $25,000 to a school in Red Deer, Alberta, who had a deep fryer and couldn't serve their students healthy lunches. So we helped get rid of the deep fryer and rebuild their kitchen. And then just this year, we have sent thousands of kids on field trips. So you'll see the school bus. We've sent them on field trips to local grocery stores to learn about the merits of eating real food. And in fact, if you look at the Toronto Star today, there's a great article about our field trips in collaboration with Loblaws, and you have teachers saying how they love this program because it complements what the kids are being taught in the classroom. And we know when kids learn about real food at school, they're more likely to take those lessons home. So the next example I have is something that actually hasn't been in market yet, but it was great to see that this is aligned with what was, I think, the most pressing issue on the poll, and that's waste, food waste. We haven't actually tackled it from a consumer perspective, and what this program with Hellmann's does is, coming up in the holiday season, we know our fridges are filled with excess food, and a lot of that food ends up in the garbage. So we are initiating a program where we're going to be inspiring consumers with leftover recipes, hoping to transform them into bestovers. And what happens is you take a picture of your leftovers, submit them, and for the week between Christmas and New Year's, there will be several prizes handed out daily. So really hoping that we can encourage consumers, instead of throwing out that leftover turkey, turn it into something delicious, and Hellmann's will reward you. So we hope this initiative is very successful and an effective way for Hellmann's to help reduce consumer food waste. And if anyone's interested in participating, you do not have to have Hellmann's in your recipe, just as an FYI. And then moving on to sustainable sourcing and Knorr. So it was good to see on the poll that many of you agree that sustainably sourced food actually tastes better. And that is something that we believe is a benefit for our consumers, and we know when our consumers are happy, we sell more product. And this really creates a virtuous circle. So we have more sustainably sourced ingredients, we have stronger consumer preference, and the Knorr brand can become even stronger and even bigger. And on the next slide, as Catherine showed you, we're making good headway on sustainably sourcing our vegetables. So we have the ambition of having all of our vegetables, meats, herbs, and spices sustainably sourced by 2020. And you can see we're well on our way of sourcing our top 13 global vegetables and herbs by 2015. So you can see that on the chart. So I'm just looking at the time, and I think I'll move to the Hellmann's example. And again, just to demonstrate our commitment to sustainable ingredients because they taste better, we really believe that happy chickens lay tastier eggs. So right now, more than half of the Hellmann's we make is made with free-run eggs, and we will be at 100% by 2020. So moving along to the next slide, again, research tells us that when you make sustainability understandable and relevant for consumers, they support your brands, and they think it's okay for brands who do good things to make money at the same time. So on the foods business at Unilever, we call that doing well by doing good. And that's really what we're hoping to achieve with the Unilever brands. We put the Sustainable Living Plan at the heart of everything we do, so we end up with better products and brands that are loved by more consumers. So in closing, we encourage, we went through everything very quickly, but when you go to unilever.com, if you want to know more about our Sustainable Living Plan, you'll see the tab at the very front or the very top of the website. You can learn more about the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And I think Catherine and I would be the first to admit we're still working on things. We're still trying to figure things out, how to do things better. But overall, we're really happy and proud of the work Unilever has accomplished so far. So again, if you would like more information, please feel free to visit our website. And now I think we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Super. Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you, Catherine. I've certainly learned a huge amount in the last half an hour there. We have got some time here for questions, and we've had some fabulous and very interesting questions and comments coming in as we've been talking. In a minute, Ali, Catherine, I'm going to ask you to comment on how, I think the first bucket of questions is around how you're measuring against the Sustainable Living Plan goals, both how you're measuring your success against them, and whether you're planning on sharing those indicators with other consumer goods companies to advance the uptake more broadly across the industry. But as you mull on that, I'm going to think through, just talk through some of the comments we have. A couple of which I thought were very interesting. One around closing the loop. So really stressing the importance to think about not a linear value chain, but how to close and move towards a circular value chain, and the interest and primacy of the waste issue has been raised by a number of commenters online, and stressing the connections between waste, food waste, and carbon dioxide, for example. But maybe the first question I'll tackle is around systemic challenges. So one of our listeners today has talked about how many of these issues are not just unique to one business but systemic, and asking how the food industry can collaborate with governments to advance sustainable food. And I think that's an excellent question. Certainly in terms of the collaborative value chain that we highlight as important from our research, there's a component which is a collaboration across industry, but there also needs to be collaboration between governments and civil society groups. And I'm encouraged that there are a number of initiatives in Canada which are driving forward on sustainable food, including industry, including government participation in value chain sustainability initiatives. We're also encouraged to see industry relying on government regulation and government policy in some areas. So, for example, the Environmental Farm Plan framework that's in place across Canada is providing some level of confidence assurance around sustainability of farm-level practices. But I'm going to turn over to the Unilever team. So, how is Unilever planning to measure its sustainable living plan goals, and are you going to share those indicators with other consumer goods companies?
Sure, and I can take a stab at that. One thing I would say off the top is that Unilever doesn't pretend for 1 second to be able to accomplish this on our own, that collaboration across all sectors, be it government or competitors, other CPG companies, NGOs, civil society groups, is necessary to make any progress on that. And I think that something that's interesting, something I remember our global CEO Paul Polman saying, is that if Unilever achieves all the goals as laid out in the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, but does not bring along any other businesses towards these kinds of goals, then we will have failed. So I think that what is primary in his objectives is bringing other companies, other businesses, other food companies along with Unilever in moving towards more sustainable practices, just because there is no way that the plan is going to be able to support the population over the long term if practices don't change. So I think on a global level, for sure, Unilever is working with a number of partners, with many partners in all parts of the globe in order to achieve. In terms of measurements, I think that in sharing of progress, I think we've been quite transparent. As Allison said, if you go to unilever.com and choose the Sustainable Living tab, progress is detailed, I would say, on that website in terms of where we are meeting our goals. We've set interim goals between 2010 and 2020, where we're meeting those goals and where we are falling short. Under each of these three main pillars, there are between 50 and 60 much more specific time-bound goals, which are itemized, and beside each of those goals is either a green, yellow, or red dot in terms of progress against our interim goals. So I I think that Unilever has taken a very transparent approach to this and wants to share best practice and wants to share progress, and is not afraid to say where we're doing well, but also where we are falling short.
Super, thanks, Catherine. And just to tee you guys up with what I think may have to be the final question for the Unilever team from people online today. There seemed to be some real interest in the Sustainable Agriculture Code, and I'll just package up a few questions around that, which I'd appreciate you commenting on, and then I can come back to maybe one Stratus question before that. So on the Sustainable Agriculture Code, do suppliers need to meet requirements against, I think it was all 11 of the different Sustainable Agriculture Code dimensions? How does Unilever determine compliance with the code, and whether those codes are internal Unilever codes, or whether you rely on existing standards? And in the meantime, I think I'll just pick up a couple of comments. There's a question around the definition and whether Stratus and Unilever use the same definition of sustainable food. I think it's safe to say that Stratus uses that internally, and it's a broad and helpful starting point for organizations as they think about sustainable food. But certainly our experience is that Unilever, and in fact Tim Hortons or McCain's or the other companies that we've looked at, define that rather more narrowly typically, and in fact don't always use the phrase sustainable food in the way that they approach things. So that's one comment to make. There was also a question around, well, what is the best practice in sustainable food? And I'm going to be slightly naughty and defer that one to our sustainable food report. And one thing that you will notice in our sustainable food report is against each of the many sustainability issues, there's an example of a great practice from a company trying to manage, from health and nutrition to supporting local communities to managing the water associated with food products. So I'd encourage you to spend a few moments looking at our report for that. And Catherine, I'll ask you, so Catherine or Ali, I'll ask you to come back on the Sustainable Agriculture Code comments.
Okay, this is Catherine. I'll answer that question. The Sustainable Agriculture Code is very widely available. It was developed by Unilever in conjunction with farmer groups, consultants, sustainability advisors over the past 6 to 8 years. It's widely available on the website and is accompanied by I think we call it a rule document, which gives it a little bit more instruction on how to use the code and how to demonstrate compliance with the code. So each of the 11 indicators has somewhere between, let's say, 15 to 20 separate requirements. So in terms of, yes, farmers need to meet all 11 aspects of the code, but within each of those 11 specific indicators, on let's say the 15 to 20 specific requirements. Some of those requirements are mandatory. Some of them are strongly recommended. Some of them are you should over time. So there's also a continuous improvement component, so that in order to be in compliance with the code and for us to consider the produce sustainably sourced, all of the mandatory sort of subcategories under each of the 11 indicators would have to be complied with. And then there would also have to be indication of a plan for continuous improvement to meet some of the other aspects of those 11 indicators. I'm not sure I explained that all that clearly, but
I think that helps enormously, Catherine. And I realize we're heading towards the bottom of the hour here, so we'll start wrapping up. But I did want to invite Catherine, Ali, if there are any closing thoughts or closing remarks that you have before we wrap up the session.
I think it's so wonderful that there were so many people interested and engaged. As Catherine mentioned, we know at Unilever we certainly can't do it alone, so just having the interest and the desire to have more sustainable food is really encouraging.
Thank you. Catherine, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I appreciate people tuning in and learning more about Unilever's approach to sustainable food and sustainable sourcing. And again, echo what Allison said in terms of working with others, be it with our suppliers, with our retail partners, with our consumers, because I think it will take all of us in order to achieve the goals that have been set out.
Well, thank you very much. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll wrap up there. It leaves me to thank Ali and Catherine for your time and for the wisdom that you've shared today. And I certainly apologize as we didn't get to anywhere like the full number of questions that were asked today. We'll certainly try to respond to those that we didn't get to. And finally, I wanted to thank you for your attention. If you'd like to get in touch with Stratas, this is my email address and the Stratas website, and we'll be sending out a follow-up email to participants in due course with the slides and information on the webinar. So thank you very much again for your attention, and have a great day.